Random thoughts. In this video, I'm going to read part of C.W. Hobley's book, Bantu Beliefs and Magic. And in this part, he's going to tell us that there was this, we can say, fight of two schools of thoughts on how they were going to handle the existing African governance structure. And I found this to be very interesting. Now, Hobley, of course, was a colonial administrator, and he came to Kenya in the 1890s and he retired in 1920s. At some point, he was a provisional commissioner. So he was a high-ranking colonial officer. And so what he says is not just theory. These are things that I think he probably attended high-level meetings where some of these things were discussed. And he seems to say that among the white settlers and colonial administrators in East Africa, Kenya, that is Kenya, there were those who were pushing that the entire African governance structure need to be collapsed. And there were those who were thinking maybe it should not be collapsed, it should be accommodated within the colonial structure. Now, I know there are people who get confused when I talk about African republics. There are people who actually believe today that there was no government before the arrival of the British in Kenya. There were governments. So, and this is a proof of it. He admits it. There were governments in place with full structures, actually, full structure top to bottom. And these were in Commonwealth that now we call tribes. They were not tribes, they were Commonwealths. Most of those in Kenya, of course, were republics. Kikuyu Republic, Kamba Republic, Maasai Republic, Kipsigis Republic, Nandi Republic, Kisii Republic, Luo Republic. Luo can be a little bit fluid, whether it was really a republic or it was a monarchy or some elements of monarchy in it. Nevertheless, it was more of a republic than a monarchy. When you go to Western Kenya, the Bukusu were definitely a republic. The others, some of them were republics, some of them were, at least we have one monarchy, that's the Mumia, of course, Nabongo Mumia, that was a republic, that was a monarchy. Now, so there was no section of Kenya. It was not Kenya then, of course, but the land. When some people have a problem when you say Kenya, and they're like, oh, Kenya did not exist until of course, the name and the region or a commonwealth called Kenya did not exist, but the land was here and there were commonwealths in existence that had governments. That's what I'm trying to say. So when the British come, they are asking themselves, what do we do with the existing governance structures? What do we do with these republics? What do we do with the Kikuyu Republic, the Kiama structure that is in existence? What do we do with the Maasai governance structure that exists with the high priest, the Laibon, and things like what do we do with the Nandi Republic, with the Aorgoyot and the Senate and all that? What do we do with the Kipsigis? All these governance structures that were across the region, what do we do about them? So there were those who are like, collapse them, destroy them completely so that the society start afresh with the British governance structure. And there were those who are like, maybe not, maybe we should accommodate them. But seems like one won. And let's read and see what he says. There are two schools of thought in existence regarding the governance of the black races in East Africa. One, this school claims to be progressive and favors the abolition of tribal control by its indigenous constitution. It is opposed to chiefs, tribal law, and customs, and it is in favor of direct government by European magistrates and by police. So the first school of thought is the one that was like, we need to abolish the African constitutions. That means the Kikuyu had a constitution that worked very fine, took care of every aspect of the existence of the citizens. We need to collapse that and go to every other republic, Maasai Republic, Kipsigis Republic, Nandi Republic, Kisii Republic, Bukusu Republic, Akamba Republic, and all these others, and also go to the sultanates. There was a sultanate in Mombasa, of course, and also go to the monarchy in the western part of Kenya. We need to collapse their constitutions, and we need to say, now we are starting afresh from the ashes, and we are starting with the British form of governance structure. Now, the second school of thought. Two, the conservative school aims at retaining and strengthening the internal forces which control a tribe, at the same time promoting an evolution of the character of that control by inducing the native leaders to slow the more repugnant customs and beliefs. So this second school of thought is like, maybe we should retain the African constitutions in their republics and monarchies. Don't destroy them. Just take the existing structure and enable it to evolve to become better. And I'm wondering if the second school of thought had won, I'm thinking probably we will not have the chaos we have in Kenya and most of the other African societies. We would have evolved in a more natural, more organic way, and we would have had more stable societies. And in fact, it mentions that, and let's see what he says. He says the former schemes receives considerable support from the settler community on the grounds that it will result in the native conjointly with themselves playing a more active part in the development of Africa. It is also supported to some extent by the missionaries who feel that the disintegration of the old order will afford them greater chance for their propaganda. So there are two sides that supported the first option, which is collapse completely the African constitutions. And these are the settler community, the British who had come and settled the headland. They were doing farming. They were trying to build a life here. They felt that if the Africans were allowed to continue evolving, that was going to be problematic for them. And I can see how. And they prefer that their constitutions were collapsed or completely dismantled, and that will allow them to have a better existence. The other group is more curious to me, and is the missionary, the people preaching Christianity, the missionary societies. They felt that by collapsing the constitutions, they had a better chance of converting. And actually, that's very true. If the old constitutions were left and supported to continue evolving, more Africans would have likely remained that side and did not find a reason to convert to Christianity. And likely would have ended up with a situation like maybe Japan, where they took in development, education, and everything, technical knowledge from the West, but they maintained their culture and their religious beliefs and things like that, or the Chinese to some extent. I think that's what the missionaries did not want. If the old constitutions were going to be supported, Africans were going to remain, East Africans were going to remain in their traditional belief system while they accumulate knowledge, technical knowledge, architecture, engineering, and things like that. That was not going to be good. That's not going to be good. That was not going to help with the spread of Christianity. He continues to say, at the same time, the probable effect of the dissolution of tribal control is rarely realized. The nearest example of such emancipation can be observed in the larger towns, and here we have thousands of natives attracted to these places by the desire to earn money. They have no natural authorities in control, and although there are, of course, respectable members in these assemblages, taking it all around, they are the biggest collection of native ruffians in the country and are saturated with every vice. Consequently, in spite of the concentration of the magisterial and police control far in excess of anything in the native reserve, crime of every kind is rife, and they have become an increasingly menace to the European residents. So he acknowledges the dangers of collapsing the African constitutions. And I'm thinking by collapsing the African constitutions, the British basically killed the soul of the Africans. And by killing the soul of the Africans, you end up with Africans who are out of control. And that's what is describing, that you can see the signs of what happens when the African constitution has been collapsed. He say you can see this in towns where the Africans are no longer attached to their ways of life, their belief system, their laws, and their customs. Then you see now they live like free range, you can say, in terms of their morals, and all forms of crime became rife. And he says this is the effect of collapsing the African constitution. And I think those effects, we feel them to date. That's why you see a lot of chaos around. I saw a video where somebody was saying, and it's a European who was saying, the issue of slums is not an issue of wealth, it's an issue of mindset. And I saw a lot of comments. People are very offended, especially people from the third world countries where you'll find slums. Of course, the issue of a slum or a ghetto is a complex one. He was saying that if you take 1,000, for example, Japanese, and you put them into the same existing slums, in a matter of days, that part will be clean and more organized, even though it's not a wealthy neighborhood. And I thought, is thinking in very simplistic ways. And the issue is just, yes, mindset. I agree with him, but it's more spiritual, if you ask me. And it's spiritual in the sense that the people in that neighborhood don't have a common, we can say, belief system that is cohesive, and then everybody believes in it. It's like people are living lawlessly because there is no common constitution they work with. Even though we live, of course, in a jurisdiction with laws, but it's going to take time because before those things start to align. So he says in the reserve where the people still lived under the constitutions of the old republics and monarchies, they did not even have police, but there were no robberies, there were no, people behaved. But in towns where they had courts, they had the police, and they had all this British colonial structure, there was a lot of chaos. Why was that? It's because these people had just been cut off from what had worked for thousands of years. These towns, colonies of natives, must be remembered, are products of our own creation and do not argue well for the native emancipation from their natural leader. So he acknowledges that actually the chaos that was seen in towns was a product of them basically collapsing the African constitution, basically killing the African soul. And now they were seeing all these chaos. And I'm thinking, if the African constitution, as I said, were not collapsed, because there were many, if they were allowed to continue evolving, likely will not be seeing the chaos we see today in Africa and the rest of, in Kenya and the rest of Africa, the corruption, the crime, and all these things. These are products of the abrupt collapse of the African constitutions. Those are my random thoughts.